Rome is a whore, a shimmering mirage of gold leaf and putrefaction, its cobblestones stained with the blood of saints and sinners alike. Don't expect some flowery introduction here, some historical deep dive. Let's cut straight to the chase. Alexander VI, nay Rodrigo Borgia, Pope of the Holy See, is a goddamn viper in silk robes. He surveys his Vatican kingdom from a throne sculpted with more ambition than piety. The papal tiara, a ridiculous three-tiered hat that screams, "I'm holier than you," weighs on his brow, but he wears it like a prize, a trophy earned in the back alleys of politics and the boudoirs of cardinals' mistresses. Years of scheming, of Spanish gold whispering promises into greedy ears, all leading to this. The fisherman's ring is heavy on his finger, heavy with the weight of power bought and paid for. Forget the noble lineage, the saintly image. The Borgias were Spanish upstarts, ruthless opportunists in a city that valued pedigree above all else. Rodrigo built his empire on alliances forged in shadows, sealed with promises as empty as a beggar's bowl. Cardinals who dared oppose him found themselves conveniently silenced, their influence vanishing faster than a courtesan's virtue after a papal decree. The Vatican, once a supposed bastion of faith, had become a playground for the damned. Gambling dens replaced prayer halls, and the whispers of conspiracy replaced the chants of monks. Fortunes were won and lost on the turn of a card, the twitch of an eye, the favor of a bedmate. And at the heart of it all, a gilded cage with a songbird inside, Lucretia Borgia, Rodrigo's daughter. 16 years old, a vision of sun-kissed hair and porcelain skin, and already a pawn in her father's grand, twisted game. Don't be fooled by the angelic facade. Lucretia is sharp, observant, and trapped in a web of her father's making. Her laughter echoes through the Vatican's halls, but behind the forced gaiety lurks a calculating mind, a survivor's instinct honed from years of navigating the viper's nest. Beside her, a shadow, a predator in cardinal's robes, Cesare Borgia, her brother. Forget the pious facade. Cesare is a wolf in sheep's clothing, his eyes cold and calculating, his ambition a raging fire that threatens to consume everything in its path. He's the muscle, the enforcer, the blade in the dark. Where Rodrigo buys power, Cesare takes it, by force if necessary. The whisper started the moment they arrived in Rome. Spanish interlopers, hungry for power, their family tree suspiciously intertwined. Rome thrives on scandal. It's the air they breathe, the wine they drink, the very foundation upon which fortunes are built and empires crumble. The Borgias, of course, provided enough fodder to feed the city's gossip mills for decades to come. Rodrigo's mistresses were paraded around like prized cattle. Illegitimate children were raised within the Vatican walls, their existence a blatant middle finger to the Church's doctrines. Cesare's reputation for violence grew with each enemy who vanished, each loose end that was neatly, permanently tied off. And Lucretia, sweet, innocent Lucretia, was caught in the crossfire, her name dragged through the mud of rumor and innuendo. The Vatican is a stage, and every player knows their lines. But the script is written in blood, and the Borgias are rewriting it, page by page. Outside the Vatican's walls, the city seethes. The common folk mutter about poison in the wine, daggers in the dark. The Borgia's enemies, the Della Rovers, the Orsinis, the Colonna, they circle like vultures, their pamphlets and broadsheets dripping with venom. Each word a carefully placed barb designed to erode the Borgia's power. Rome had seen corruption before. It had tolerated popes with mistresses, cardinals with secret families, but never had it witnessed such brazen disregard for decency, such blatant nepotism, such personality. And so, beneath the frescoed ceilings of the apostolic palace, the seeds of a darker legend took root. The whispers slithered through the shadows like snakes, their venom seeping into every corner of the city. What manner of family is this? What sins lie hidden behind closed doors? The stage is set, the players are ready, and the world will never forget the name Borgia. Rodrigo's mistresses were paraded around like prized cattle. Illegitimate children were raised within the Vatican walls, their existence a blatant middle finger to the Church's doctrines. Cesare's reputation for violence grew with each enemy who vanished, each loose end that was neatly, permanently tied off. And Lucretia, sweet, innocent Lucretia, was caught in the crossfire, her name dragged through the mud of rumor and innuendo. The Vatican is a stage, and every player knows their lines. But the script is written in blood, and the Borgias are rewriting it, page by page. Outside the Vatican's walls, the city seethes. The common folk mutter about poison in the wine, daggers in the dark. The Borgias' enemies, the Della Roveres, the Orsinis, the Colonna, they circle like vultures, their pamphlets and broadsheets dripping with venom, each word a carefully placed barb designed to erode the Borgias' power. Rome had seen corruption before. It had tolerated popes with mistresses, cardinals with secret families, but never had it witnessed such brazen disregard for decency, such blatant nepotism, such personality. And so, beneath the frescoed ceilings of the Apostolic Palace, the seeds of a darker legend took root. The whispers slithered through the shadows like snakes, their venom seeping into every corner of the city. What manner of family is this? What sins lie hidden behind closed doors? The stage is set, the players are ready, and the world will never forget the name Borgia. The first whispers were like smoke, thin and insubstantial, but impossible to ignore. They curled through the taverns of Rome, slithered between the lips of courtiers in the Vatican's antechambers, and seeped into the ink of anonymous pamphlets left in the piazzas at dawn. The daughter shares the father's bed. The brother's gaze lingers too long. Nobody knew who said the words first. It doesn't matter. They spread like plague, infecting the city's collective consciousness. The Borgias' enemies needed no proof, only scandal, only something vile enough to erode the family's grip on power. And what was more vile than incest? The pamphlets appeared overnight, crude woodcuts depicting twisted embraces, their figures vague enough to avoid outright libel, but unmistakable in their intent. Rodrigo's jowled face, Cesare's sharp features, Lucretia's flowing hair, all rendered in grotesque caricature. The text was worse, verses dripping with innuendo, prayers twisted into obscenity. O Holy Father, who art in bed, unhallowed be thy name. Lucretia, walking through the Vatican gardens with her ladies, would find them falling silent as she approached, their eyes darting away, filled with a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. She was no fool. She knew what they said, knew what they whispered behind their hands. But to acknowledge it would be to give the rumors power, to validate the slander. Cesare, ever the wolf, reacted differently. He cornered a printer in the dead of night, his dagger pressing into the man's throat until he named his patron, an Orsini lackey paid to distribute filth. The printer's body was found floating in the Tiber the next morning, his tongue cut out. The message was clear, brutal, and effective. But the damage was done. Scandal, once unleashed, could not be so easily sheathed. Rodrigo, for his part, dismissed it all with a wave of his ringed hand. Let the dogs bark, he told Lucretia, his voice thick with wine. They envy what they cannot have. But his nonchalance only fueled the speculation. Why would a pope, God's representative on earth, not rage against such slander, unless the rumors held a grain of truth? At a banquet hosted by Cardinal Orsini, a rival faction, a poet recited verses laden with double meaning, his eyes flickering toward Lucretia as he spoke of flowers plucked too soon. The room erupted in stifled laughter, a chorus of knowing glances and barely concealed delight. Lucretia, her cheeks burning, kept her chin high, her mask of serenity firmly in place. But later, in the privacy of her chambers, she shattered a vase against the wall, the shards mirroring the fragments of her reputation. Cesare found her there, kneeling among the wreckage. "They will pay," he promised, his voice a blade unsheathed. But payment was not enough. The whispers had taken root, and in the shadows of Renaissance Rome, where truth and lies were currency, the most dangerous stories were the ones people wanted to believe. Incest was the unforgivable sin, the violation of nature, the corruption of bloodlines, the unraveling of divine order. In a world where the church preached purity and the sanctity of family, no accusation carried more weight. For the Borgia's enemies, it was the perfect weapon. Rome had long tolerated the vices of its rulers, the bribery, the murder, even the open flaunting of mistresses. But incest? That was different. It was a sin so monstrous it could not be spoken aloud in polite company, yet so tantalizing it spread like wildfire in the dark. The Borgias were already reviled for their Spanish blood, their insatiable greed, their brazen nepotism. But the whispers of incest transformed them from mere sinners into something far worse, abominations. And yet the irony was bitter. The Borgias were guilty, just not of this. Rodrigo had bought the papacy with chests of gold, securing votes from cardinals whose piety dissolved at the sight of Spanish coin. Cesare had ordered assassinations with the casual cruelty of a man who believed himself above earthly justice. Lucretia's marriages were brokered like trade agreements, her body a bargaining chip in her father's endless games of power. These were sins Rome could understand, even expect, but they were not enough to destroy the family, not like this rumor could. The pamphlets grew bolder, more explicit. One slipped under the door of a Venetian ambassador, depicted Lucretia as a modern-day Phaedra, her arms entwined with both father and brother. Another, read aloud in the taverns of Trastevere, spun a tale of a papal key that unlocked more than just heaven's gates. The Borgia's enemies needed no proof, only the seed of doubt, watered by the public's insatiable appetite for scandal. Even the church's own teachings fed the flames. Sermons on morality, on the sins of Sodom, on the damnation that awaited those who defiled sacred bonds, all twisted into veiled condemnations of the Borgias. A Florentine preacher, his voice trembling with righteous fury, spoke of a house where the serpent nests in the marriage bed. He didn't name names. He didn't need to. Lucretia, trapped in the eye of the storm, became both villain and victim. To some, she was the seductress, the temptress who ensnared her own kin. To others, she was the pawn, the innocent corrupted by the men who should have protected her. The truth mattered less than the story, and the story was too delicious to resist. Cesare, ever the strategist, saw the danger. "They paint us as monsters," he snarled to his father, "because they cannot defeat us as rivals." Rodrigo, reclining in his chambers with a goblet of wine, only chuckled. Let them talk. Words are wind. But words, as Cesare knew, could topple empires. The Borgia's real sins, their bribes, their murders, their naked ambition, were mundane beside the myth taking shape. A myth that would outlive them all. For in the end, history remembers not what men do, but what others say they did. And Rome was already writing the Borgia's epitaph in ink stained with poison.
Lucrezia Borgia was never merely a daughter. She was a key, a finely wrought golden key to the vaults of power her father, Alexander VI, sought to unlock. From the moment she could walk, she had been groomed for a singular purpose, to serve the Borgia dynasty. But was she a willing participant in her father's machinations, or merely a pawn moved across the chessboard of Renaissance politics? The answer, like so much of her life, lay shrouded in the shadows of the Vatican. Rodrigo Borgia had never been a man to let sentiment interfere with ambition. His love for Lucrezia was real, of that there was little doubt. But it was a love tempered by calculation, a love that saw her as his most valuable asset, a jewel to be bartered for alliances, lands, and influence. By the age of 13, she had already been betrothed twice. Her hand promised to noblemen whose loyalty could be bought or whose territories could be absorbed into the Borgia web. The first marriage, to Giovanni Sforza of Pesaro, was a cold transaction. The Sforzas were a powerful Milanese family, and the union secured Alexander's northern interests. But when the political winds shifted, so too did Lucrezia's fate. The marriage was dissolved under murky circumstances, Giovanni fleeing Rome in terror, rumors swirling that the annulment hinged on claims of his impotence, or worse, that Alexander had fabricated the entire ordeal to free Lucrezia for a more advantageous match. "You will be a queen," her father had murmured to her when the Sforza marriage crumbled, his fingers brushing her cheek with deceptive tenderness. Not a countess, not a lord's wife, a queen. Lucrezia had bowed her head, her voice steady. "As you wish, Holy Father." But behind the obedient words, what did she truly feel? Some historians would later paint her as a passive ornament, her will bent entirely to her father's. Others would argue she was a keen player in the game, her sweetness a mask for a mind as sharp as any dagger. The truth, perhaps, lay somewhere in between. Her second marriage, to Alfonso of Aragon, a prince of Naples, was another piece in Alexander's grand design. Naples was a jewel in the Mediterranean, and with Lucrezia as its future queen, the Borgias would command the south as they did Rome. But this union, too, would end in blood. Alfonso would not live to see his throne, his body left broken in a Roman alley, his killers never named, but widely suspected. It was these marriages, these abrupt, brutal shifts in her fate, that fed the darkest whispers. Why would a father so publicly parade his daughter through betrothals and annulments unless there was something unnatural in their bond? What groom could satisfy a bride already claimed by her own kin? Lucrezia's ladies reported hearing her weep at night, but by dawn she was always composed, her face a serene mask as she attended Mass at her father's side. Was it resignation, complicity, or the steely resolve of a woman who understood that survival in the Borgia court meant playing the game better than anyone else? Alexander, for his part, seemed untroubled by the rumors. When a cardinal dared to allude to the scandal in a consistory meeting, the Pope's laughter boomed through the hall. "Do you think I would share such a treasure with any man, even my own son?" The jest was calculated, brazen enough to mock the accusation, yet laced with just enough ambiguity to unsettle. In the end, Lucrezia's value to her father was never in question. She was the perfect instrument, beautiful, intelligent, malleable when necessary, ruthless when required. Whether she embraced her role or merely endured it mattered little to Alexander. The Borgias did not deal in love, they dealt in power. And power, as Rome was learning, was a far more dangerous thing than desire. Cesare Borgia moved through Rome like a blade unsheathed, swift, silent, and deadly. Where his father ruled with gold and guile, Cesare preferred steel. His reputation was carved in blood, the cardinal who had cast aside his robes for armor, the Pope's son who commanded armies with the same ease he once recited scripture. But it was his relationship with Lucrezia that truly set tongues wagging. The siblings were inseparable. Cesare, ever the protector, hovered at Lucrezia's side, his presence a silent warning to those who might think to harm or slight her. He escorted her to Mass, lingered at her banquets, and dismissed her suitors with a glance that promised violence. To outsiders, their closeness was unnatural. To the Borgias, it was simply the way of their world. Lucrezia, for her part, seemed to bask in her brother's shadow. Where others saw menace, she saw devotion. "No one understands him as I do," she once confided to a lady-in-waiting, her voice tinged with pride. "He is not the monster they paint him to be." But Rome knew better, or at least it thought it did. The rumors had begun years earlier, when Lucrezia was still a girl. Whispers that Cesare lingered too long in her chambers, that his kisses lingered on her cheek, that his gifts, jewels, silks, a dagger with a pearl handle, were more fitting for a lover than a brother. The truth, as ever, was murkier. Cesare was possessive, yes, but whether his love was fraternal or something darker, none could say for certain. Even history hesitates to draw the line. What was undeniable was Cesare's role in Lucrezia's scandals. When her first marriage to Giovanni Sforza crumbled, it was Cesare who delivered the annulment papers, and Cesare who was rumored to have threatened Giovanni's life if he refused to sign. When her second husband, Alfonso of Aragon, was found stabbed in an alley, it was Cesare's name that rose to the surface like a corpse in the Tiber. He would kill for her, the courtiers murmured, but would he kill because of her? The question haunted Lucrezia's reputation. Did Cesare eliminate Alfonso out of political necessity or out of jealousy? The timing was damning. Alfonso had been young, handsome, beloved by Lucrezia in a way none of her previous suitors had been. Their marriage had been one of rare affection, a fleeting glimpse of happiness in the Borgia's cutthroat world, and then, abruptly, it ended in blood. Cesare never confessed, but he never denied it either. When pressed by a drunken nobleman at a banquet, he merely smiled, swirling his wine. A man who cannot keep what is his does not deserve to keep it. Lucrezia's grief was public, her tears genuine, but within weeks she was back at her father's side, her mourning clothes exchanged for silks, her face a mask of composure. Some said she had forgiven Cesare, others whispered she had known all along. The siblings' bond only deepened in the aftermath. Cesare, ever the strategist, ensured Lucrezia's next marriage would be to a man of his choosing, Alfonso d'Este, Duke of Ferrara, a match that would secure the Borgia's legacy in the north. And Lucrezia, ever the dutiful daughter, acquiesced. But Rome never forgot. The rumors festered, fed by Cesare's ruthless reputation and Lucrezia's enigmatic silence. Had they been partners in crime? Had their bond crossed the line from loyalty into something unspeakable? The truth, like so much of the Borgia's lives, was buried beneath layers of power, propaganda, and poison. But one thing was certain. In the shadow of Cesare Borgia, Lucrezia was both protected and imprisoned, a queen on a chessboard where every move was dictated by blood. And blood, as the Borgias knew better than anyone, was the one thing that never washed clean.
The banquet hall glittered like a gilded cage, candles dripping wax onto silver platters, their flames casting long, flickering shadows across the frescoed walls. Pope Alexander VI sat at the head of the table, his laughter booming as he raised a jeweled goblet to his lips. Around him, Rome's most powerful men feasted, cardinals in their crimson silks, nobles with their rings flashing, all of them unaware that they were players in a deadly game. This was the Borgia table, and not all who dined would leave alive. Lucretia, draped in emerald velvet, presided over the feast with practiced grace, her fingers brushing the stem of her wineglass, her lips curved in a smile that never reached her eyes. Beside her, Cesare lounged like a panther, his gaze sharp as it swept the room. The air was thick with the scent of roasted meats and spiced wine, and something else, something acrid beneath the perfume. The first to falter was Cardinal Orsini. His face, already flushed from wine, turned ashen. He clutched his stomach, his breath coming in ragged gasps. I feel unwell," he muttered, but his words were lost in the din of laughter. By the time his body hit the floor, convulsing, the servants were already moving forward, not to help, but to discreetly drag him away. The music played on. One by one, others began to sway. A young lord retched into his plate. A bishop clawed at his throat, his eyes bulging. The poison worked swiftly, a silent assassin in the wine, the bread, the sugared fruits. Some said it was Cantarella, the Borgia's signature brew, a concoction so refined it left no trace, only corpses. Lucretia watched it all, her expression serene. When Cesare leaned close, his breath warm against her ear, she did not flinch. "They should not have crossed us," he murmured. She sipped her wine. "No, they should not have." By dawn, 6 men were dead. The official story would blame bad shellfish, a tragic accident, but Rome knew better. The whispers spread like wildfire. The Borgias had purged their enemies in plain sight, feasting as their guests choked on their last breaths. It was not the first such banquet, nor would it be the last. These poisoned feasts became legend, reinforcing the family's monstrous image. What kind of people murdered under the guise of hospitality? What kind of daughter sat calmly as men died at her table? The answer was simple. The Borgias were not like other people. They played by their own rules, and woe to those who forgot it. As the bodies were carried away, Alexander raised his glass once more, his smile genial. "To health," he toasted, and the survivors, trembling, drank. Years pass. The wedding had been a spectacle of silk and gold, a display of Borgia power meant to dazzle Rome. Lucretia, barely 13, had stood before the altar in a gown of Venetian lace, her small hands clasped in those of Giovanni Sforza, Lord of Pesaro. The groom, twice her age, had smiled with the confidence of a man who believed himself favored by fortune. He did not yet know his marriage was a transaction, one that would end as abruptly as it began, and in whispers darker than the Tiber at midnight. The feast that followed was lavish, even by Borgia standards. Wine flowed in rivers, and the tables groaned under the weight of roasted peacocks, their feathers reattached in grotesque splendor. Lucretia, her face a mask of practiced serenity, accepted toasts from men who eyed her like a prize. Across the hall, her father and brother watched, their expressions unreadable. When the time came for the bedding ceremony, the guests erupted into bawdy cheers. Tradition demanded the bride be escorted to the marital chamber, where the marriage would be consummated under the gaze of witnesses, proof of its legitimacy. But as the crowd surged forward, Alexander raised a hand. "Enough," he said, his voice cutting through the noise. "My daughter is a child still. Let them retire in peace." The room fell silent. It was a breach of custom, a refusal to let Rome see the marriage sealed. Giovanni's face darkened, but he dared not protest. Lucretia was led away by her ladies, her steps measured, her eyes downcast. Behind closed doors, the truth of what transpired or did not would become the subject of fevered speculation. Giovanni would later claim the marriage was consummated. Lucretia, in the annulment proceedings, would insist it was not. But the annulment itself was a masterpiece of Borgia cunning. Alexander, needing to sever ties with the Sforzas as Milan's political winds shifted, declared the marriage void on grounds of non-consummation, a humiliation for Giovanni, who was forced to sign a document attesting to his own impotence. "No man would admit such a thing willingly," Giovanni snarled to his allies after fleeing Rome. "They threatened me. The Pope's own son held a knife to my throat." The rumors took flight. Had Giovanni been impotent, as the Borgias claimed, or had something far more sinister prevented the marriage's consummation? Whispers slithered through the streets. Had Lucretia's father or brother intervened? Had she been kept untouched for darker purposes? The Vatican's official stance was firm. The marriage was invalid, and Lucretia was free to wed again, for the good of the Church. But Rome was not so easily convinced. The annulment reeked of political maneuvering, or worse, of secrets too vile to name. Lucretia, for her part, said nothing. She withdrew to the convent of San Sisto, her sudden piety raising eyebrows. Was it grief, shame, or a strategic retreat, allowing the scandal to cool before her next role in her father's ambitions? Giovanni, stripped of his bride and his pride, would spend years railing against the Borgias, his fury fueling the rumors. "They are monsters," he wrote to a fellow noble. "What kind of father annuls his daughter's marriage on such grounds unless he has other uses for her?" The question lingered unanswered. For Lucretia, the first wedding night was not a beginning, but a prelude, a taste of the betrayals and intrigues that would define her life. And for Rome, it was proof that in the House of Borgia, even love was a weapon. The tale ends.